the last video lecture, we have seen about realism, where we have understood how realism has developed and what are the 3 S of realism, and which is basically the core tenets of realism. Now we'll move our discussion forward and we will understand that what are the 3 structures under realism or the 3 schools of realism thought. Realism has been divided into 3 schools of thought: classical, structural and neoclassical realism. So we'll understand all the 3 structures. So the first structure is the classical realism. The classical realism, when we see it, it is the oldest realism that we find. It is the oldest form of realism. It is the oldest realism, and it basically posts that the realism exists or real countries fight with each other because countries are driven by the same phenomena as the human nature is driven. The human nature is that of power maximization. The human nature is selfish, and as the human nature also tends towards anarchy, the countries will also go for fighting with each other for the purpose of resources or for the purpose of maximum benefit for themselves. This is the classical thought. We'll come to that later on. Then there is a structural component. Structural component believes that because the structure is anarchical, there is anarchical structure, or the structure has anarchy. Because of the anarchical structure, it creates the problem of what we call as realism, and that creates conflict between different countries. So realism, as per the structural realism, believes because of the structure, it is not due to the human nature. They shun away the human nature argument altogether given by the classical realist. Structural realist says that it has nothing to do with human nature but with the structure. The structure of the world is anarchical, hence the countries go for conflict with each other. Because if the structure will not be anarchical, if the structure will be rule bound, the countries would not have gone for. But every country is power maximizer, that is why they are going. Then last thing is that of neoclassical, which says that there is importance of structure, no denial in the importance of structure. Structure is important as given in structural realism in the second phase, but it also mentions at the same point of time that the ultimate determination authority of what action needs to be taken or what action needs not to be taken, it will be dependent again on the state. The state will be final deciding authority, irrespective of what is happening in the structure, that what it has to do. We'll understand them one by one. Let us go for the deeper explanation of the same. When we talk about classical realism says they base that the problem arises due to the problems in the human nature. And human nature is selfish, power-centric and power maximization. So the countries also are driven by the same thing. So they are also going for power maximization. This power maximization brings the countries into conflict with each other. This breeds the conflict with each other. Because of this power maximization, there is conflict between the countries with each other. And this eventually leads to a conflict between the neighboring countries and ultimately resulting into a full-blown war. The idea can be traced to the times of Plato, to the time of Thucydides, when he has predicted more than 24 centuries ago. So more than 24 centuries ago, Thucydides has predicted about Peloponnesian War, which was a conflict between, at that point of time, Athens versus Sparta, in which he explained that there are 2 kinds of power. Athens, which was the hegemon power, which was the hegemon of the world at that point of time, or the region at that point of time, was challenged with the aggressive rise of Sparta, which was an aspiring power. So it was a conflict between Athens versus Sparta. And this model has also been supported by classical realist scholars like that of Hans Morgenthau, that we have also seen in the last lecture. Today also it reflects the rivalry between USA and China. The same, when we talk about the rivalry between USA and China today, we relate, you will see it in sometime in newspaper also, that it is related to Thucydides trap. It is related to Thucydides trap, where USA appears as the hegemon of the world. It is the hegemon of the world today. And now it is being met by an aggressive and rising China who wants to replace USA as an aspiring power or as a hegemon power of the world. So this is the classical thought, because the countries are driven by human nature. Human nature is selfish, power centric, so they are power maximizers, and eventually they will come into conflict with each other. Now the second school of thought is structural realism, and the scholar associated with the same is Kenneth Waltz. It is Kenneth Waltz who basically gives the idea of structural realism. They say that it is not the human nature. They shun out the human nature altogether. They will put out the human nature altogether. They say that human nature is not responsible for the state to determine the action. One person decision will not drive the people to, or the country to go for a war. If I am the head of a country, my decision will not determine, or my human nature will not determine that I will go for a conflict with another country. But what will determine is that, according to them, it is the structure. It is the structure that determines when the countries go for conflict with each other. It is the structure that pushes the countries to go for conflict with each other. It is not the human nature, it is the structure. Kenneth Waltz says, then when you look at the world system, in world system what do you observe? That in world system, that we have taken the example yesterday also, when Iran decided to block the Strait of Hormuz, there is absence of world government. There is absence of world global police force. So no one is there to implement order. So there is no ruler. There are rules, but there is no ruler. So the world system is how? The world system is that of anarchy. And anarchy is the base of realism. So they say that when the world system is anarchical, the countries will perceive each other as the opponent. And this anarchical spiral, no one has created this anarchical spiral. Last class I also explained that there is no winner. But there is an anarchical spiral that is created, which leads to what we call as security dilemma. And this security dilemma will contribute to what we call as the problem between the countries and ultimately leading to conflict. Now this is given by structural realists like that of like that of Kenneth Waltz. Now another person that comes into picture is John Mearsheimer. The structural realism is itself divided into two parts. One is what we call as defensive realism. Now the scholar that is associated with defensive realism is Kenneth Waltz. Kenneth Waltz is associated with defensive realism, and this person that is defended with the other form of realism is offensive realism, and the other person that is associated with offensive realism is John Mearsheimer. How do they differentiate between each other? Let us understand easily. Defensive realism says that the countries are not power maximizers, they are security maximizers. The countries are security maximizers. The countries are not power maximizers, they are security maximizers. So they are maximizing their security. Now this security creates a security dilemma. So they are not maximizing power, they are just creating defensive condition. If I am a country A, India, when it had gone for nuclear armament, what did it say? It did not say that our nuclear weapons are targeted towards Pakistan or China. It says that we are surrounded by two hostile neighbors. One of them, that is China, is a nuclear country. So we are creating nuclear weapons only as a deterrence. And that was also reflected in India's nuclear policy, where we have announced no first use, wherein under no consideration, till the time India is attacked by a nuclear weapon, India will never use the nuclear weapon in the first instance on a non-nuclear country, or even if it is a nuclear country, India will never use the nuclear weapon in the first instance. It will only resort to the use of nuclear weapons once it has been attacked by the same. So this is what India's no first use policy also stands for. And this is what offensive realism is. That we are not preparing weapons, we are not going for maximization of security or maximization of power, we are going for maximization of security. It is for the defensive purposes. But John Mearsheimer says that it should not be followed. What should be followed is offensive realism. Offensive realism says that you should be always better prepared, you should maximize your strength, as well as you should try to take the advantage of the situation, counter your enemy if any, such that you can establish your hegemony, or you can ensure that your survival is not impacted by another country. This explains the Israel's recent attack on Iran. Israel is attacking Iran not because that they are not defensive. They are using offensive realism technique. That before that Iran can go for nuclear armamization, let us destroy Iran altogether. And this will solve the problem. So these are the two schools of thought under structural realism. The third realism is neoclassical realism. Neoclassical realism says that yes, there is influence of structure, no denial in that the structure pushes the countries. Structure is anarchical. There is absence of world government and it pushes the countries. But it also says that we have to remember one thing, that the ultimate decision-making authority under realism is all and all state. It reiterates the importance of state. That ultimate decision authority, even if the structure is anarchical, a country can remain peaceful. A country can choose not to indulge into any kind of war, maintain its neutrality, when the decision will be taken by state. The state is the primary element that determines how the relationship will be shaped between the other countries. So this is the important paradigm that they highlight, that state is the primary decision maker. And it can also be a situation where the state's own calculus can tell them to go for power maximization. Now the scholars associated with them are Gideon Rose and Stephen Walt. And the state decision can also be counterproductive, as I have told you, which we can see that Germany has been acting as a revisionist state. So it is the state that is determining. So there was an order. So the world order was not anarchical. Why? After World War I, there was formation of League of Nations. So when League of Nations were formed, so there was a world government, some sort of world government, and the world system was not anarchical. But Germany was driven by revenge, and they were a revisionist state. They wanted to go to the same level that they were having before World War I, and it eventually led to what? It eventually led to war between or what we called as World War II. So it is not like that this will never happen. This can still happen, the conflict can still happen. So this is the three schools of realism: the classical school, the structural school, and then the neoclassical school. The last thing that comes into our mind is that why realism faces problem, or what are the challenges faced by realism. Does realism as a theory faces any problem or not? Is there any problem in realism? Yes, there is a problem. Realism, if we go by the realism, so the countries will always be going for maximization of power or maximization of security, and there will be perpetual anarchy and there will be perpetual conflict if we go by the mainstream of realism. But what do we understand? If we understand the end of Cold War, if we look at the Cold War, so as per realism could have never predicted the end of Cold War. Realism could have never predicted the end of Cold War. And realism would also say that the Cold War should never end because the countries are continuously going for expansion. So it will never highlight that why Cold War has ended. So this is also a thing that we have to understand. Secondly, realism also is not morally justified. The moral justification is also missing in realism. If we look at realism, it is not able to understand the moral justification. For example, countries are launching attack and killing the people from the other territories just in the name of providing or ensuring national security for their citizens. So a country A will attack country B, kill innocent civilians, destroy their defense infrastructure in the name of protecting the national interest of country people A. So this is not morally justified, this is not morally defensible. And the third thing that realism faces the problem is that it fails to acknowledge that there is also element, if there is element of mistrust, there is also element of cooperation between the countries. There are also elements of cooperation between the countries. Countries also cooperate with each other. And then there are some emerging trends which will need cooperation from all the countries around the world. So there are some what we called in IR, these are called as non-traditional security concern. Non-traditional security concerns. For example, like that of climate change. If we talk about climate change, realism will not talk about how to tackle climate change. Now it is not a problem that is centric to one country. It is a problem that the entire world is facing. Climate change. So what does it need? It needs cooperation. But realism will say that cooperation cannot be observed between the countries. If we have seen COVID some time back, pandemic. So how do we analyze this relationship? If we talk about what we call as terrorism, terrorism is a problem that is now being faced even by the most advanced Western European countries. It needs coordination to be removed from the planet Earth. So cooperation will also be there. And what does this cooperation highlight? Cooperation will highlight liberal institutionalism. How can this cooperation can be emerged? How can it be maintained? It can only be maintained from what we call as liberal institutionalism. So it highlights our next theory that we'll discuss in the next video lecture, that what is liberalism and then what is liberal institutionalism. What is the idea of liberalism, idealism and liberal institutionalism. So we'll understand this. So every theory has its problem. And if we go by the last criticism of realism, we can also say that realism fails to explain the problem within the territory. Because if you remember from the past video lecture, in past video lecture we said that Max Weber used to say that the complete authority or monopoly of use of power in a particular territory is with the state. So then ideally there should have had been no conflict within the state. But we also see that a country, if we take the example of India's neighbor like that of Bangladesh, Nepal, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, Myanmar, these countries are not facing problem from external territories. These countries are facing the problem from within their territories. Their weak political structure, their weak economical structure is creating a problem for these countries. And this is going against their survival as a state. That is why some of these states are called as failed states. So what is going against the survival of, suppose say, Pakistan, Myanmar, Bangladesh, Nepal? It is their weak political and economic structure, not any other countries impacting them or attacking them. So what does this highlight? That realism, which says that a survival is real and creates a threat perception from the other countries, it is not always that a threat perception might come from the other countries. A country's weak economic political structure can create a problem for the country itself and can challenge its survival. So realism also fails to explain the same. In next lecture, we'll understand about the next ideology, which is called as liberalism, the liberal ideology in IR, and then we'll also try to understand what is liberal institutionalism and other forms of liberalism, that is republican, that is commercial liberalism. We'll understand all the different forms of liberalism in our next video lecture. Thank you.